Hello, this is my presentation on acceptable use policies, what they are, how they are used in my current district, and some tips and tricks for what you can do to implement your very own acceptable use policy in your organization. Firstly, what is an acceptable use policy? It's a device or a procedure that's put in place so that a organization can define allowable uses for electronics and internet capable devices on their networks and their systems. They are there to protect users and organizations from harm in the case of any untoward or nefarious actions that take place. And they allow organizations to manage their network via what are called MDM or MAM procedures. An MDM procedure is managing devices, or a mobile device management, I should say, in which companies can actually take control of a user's device, whether that be a desktop computer, a laptop, or a cell phone that's given by the organization. An MAM procedure would be managing applications on a device so that a company could block an application from either sending or receiving materials that they feel are unneeded or in some way dangerous to the user or the system. Depending on the type of control needed by the organization, those systems can be used either in collaboration with one another, or they can be used independently of each other. Different types of organizations use AUPs in their everyday operations. Businesses, for example, tend to use their acceptable use policies to discuss email abuses and what should or should not be sent via emails for employees. They are concerned usually about cyber slacking, in which employees are using their internet devices to not perform their jobs in a diligent manner, so they'll be surfing the internet or Facebook instead of actually doing their job. They are concerned about protecting company data that is either discussed via email or is stored on devices that users often take home, like cell phones or laptops issued by the company. And they also discuss their ability to monitor activity from users so that employees will know that they are being tracked and they will be watched by management as they go about their day. Internet service providers, on the other hand, are also concerned with discussing acceptable uses on their system. They're more concerned, however, about email abuses in addition to unauthorized access to their systems. Since it is a pay service, they're worried that other people other than their customers are gaining access to their systems, and discuss the legalities of allowing other people to be on the network when they are not intended to be. Copyright infringement is a big deal for ISPs, since they can be held liable from outside organizations if people are taking content without the proper citations or the proper permissions from the originator of the content. And oftentimes newsgroup postings are discussed in the AUPs for ISP internet service providers, because those can take a lot of bandwidth away from other customers and the system as a whole. Schools, on the other hand, tend to include bits of all the other types of AUPs that are across those two genres. Schools also discuss email abuses, what can and cannot be sent via email by students and by staff, unauthorized access and keeping passwords and usernames and systems that are logged in secured so that they are not going to be used by people that are not supposed to be using them. Copyright infringement is often discussed because teachers as well as students will do research, will try to use different content in educational ways that perhaps are not being done properly, or not being cited properly, or being used in ways that are not actually protected under copyright law. Illicit content can be explicitly laid out in AUPs because students, for the most part, are underage and need to be protected from certain content while online resources are being employed. Prohibited actions are more specifically laid out for schools than even for businesses or ISPs. That is, schools will very often actually give examples or lists of things that can and cannot be done while on their systems. Schools also, like businesses, will tell the users, rather, that they are being monitored and that their actions and their doings on the system are being recorded and are being watched by those in administration. And unlike the other two systems, disciplinary actions are often laid out very specifically for schools, for the types of offenses and the number of offenses that are done by the users on the system. For Montgomery County Public Schools, where I teach, their acceptable use policy is a rather lengthy document, but can be broken down into three specific areas or three specific topics. The first that they discuss are the different terms and components that one can see in the AUP. Secondly, they'll describe the prohibited behaviors that users are discouraged from taking part in. And then three, define the disciplinary actions and consequences that can occur because of infractions that take place. So for Montgomery County's acceptable use policy, this document is easily found on the Montgomery County Public Schools website. I was able to download it and read through it at my leisure. The purpose, of course, is just like any acceptable use policy, to describe for the users the different actions that can take place and the protections that are there for them. As I mentioned, the definitions of certain parts of the system are defined for the users, things that perhaps are either vague in their everyday use or maybe unheard of to the average user are laid out, specifically cyberbullying, harassment, intimidations, what is acceptable educational purpose, what is electronic data, an electronic record, electronic signatures, which in my case, I found interesting that electronical sounds can also be considered an electronic signature. So they do define some things in here that are perhaps foreign to those that are in and outside of the system. The second part of the AUP here is a list of procedures and activities that users are either responsible for or prohibited from doing while on the system itself, both the physical things that they are not allowed to do with the equipment and the online rules and regulations that they have to follow. Lastly, there is an entire section dedicated to the disciplinary actions that can take place. As you can see, this is still a list of do's and don'ts for the user. It goes into quite significant detail. But the non-compliance section actually discusses for both employees and for students what can happen if you fail to follow the policy to its fullest extent and what will take place after that. How should one implement an acceptable use policy? Typically, parents and students need to be on board with the policy so that they can actually use the system safely and can be protected as well when they're using the system. For that reason, Montgomery County Public Schools also has a parent agreement that they send home, usually during the first week of school, for students and parents to sign in regards to an acceptable use policy. Now, the one that the students and parents receive is a little bit different. As you can see, this is only a 2-page document, whereas the actual full AUP for Montgomery County Public Schools is about 9 pages altogether. This one is not as plentiful in information, but it does describe all of the things that are expected of users on the system, the do's and don'ts, as it were. That second topic in the AUP is very highly discussed. And At the end, students, of course, are to agree to all of the rules pertained in this take-home version. The one thing that I found interesting and surprising was that the parents have 2 signature places that they can choose from. One, where they accept that their student, or son or daughter, I should say, will be given access to our systems. But secondly, they have a non-consent area that they can sign, which means that they do not want their child to have access to internet equipment or the internet while they are in the school building. I can't say necessarily how many people take advantage of this, but I would have to believe that it's far and few between the parents that would choose to keep their children away from such a powerful and prevalent tool in the education system. Oh, I apologize. In addition to this student and parent contract, education is a key. In our actual acceptable use policy, it states that students have the right to be educated in proper usage and safe usage of internet devices and the procedures to take place. For that to happen, modeling should take place in which educators, administrators, and parents actually show students what is acceptable and what is not acceptable while online by using online resources and tools on a daily basis in front of them and with them. Communication is a key as well, so that parents and students can feel free to discuss concerns and questions that they may have about acceptable uses while on the system. Some tips and tricks, things that can be done to help implement and strengthen an acceptable use policy would be: 1. Having a class activity, developing a blog or a website with students so that they can either educate people on different topics or content, or to present different ideas via a website or a blog page so they can see what it's like to actually design links and to build their own content. Use writing assignments in which they can discuss uses and misuses of electronic media, either via talking about things that they have witnessed or seen, or perhaps events that have taken place in their own life while they've been using electronic media in or out of school. It can be a great learning experience and a great teachable moment if this were to become a whole class activity. Having a positive school atmosphere and environment is fantastic in that it allows students and parents to feel free to share concerns and questions and not feel that they're going to be blamed or somehow reprimanded for trying to bring something to the attention of the teacher or administrators or their parents. For that reason, you shouldn't punish victims either. If a breach occurs or something happens while they're using the system, it's better that it's taken care of and that the teacher, administrators, and parents know about it rather than them try to hide it or ignore the behavior. And as always, involving the community, parents, in any decisions or in anything that concerns the running of the school is always a great idea and should be used in its utmost regard. So the parent and student communications via email and via the send home papers are ideal and should be mandatory. There are many outside resources that were used as far as Montgomery County Public Schools resources, but as far as the outside resources that I recommend, there was one very fantastic tool that I found, which was a conglomeration of research. The Principals Partnership Foundation did a research brief on acceptable use policies, and many of the different tools and tricks that I discussed in here were laid out in this very large brief, and it pulled information in from the Centers for Disease Control and from all sorts of other different institutions that have ideas for how to use social media in acceptable use policies and how to work with IT and educational staff. I hope that this was informative and helpful, and I hope that you will be able to incorporate these ideas into your own AUP in the future. Thank you.